Well, hello and welcome to After the Sermon, a Bethany podcast where we have the privilege of digging deeper into our Sunday messages. I am Tami DeLau, and today I am joined with Pastor David Baxley and Pastor Steve Musto, and we are entering a new season and a new series. Christmas is coming.
Yeah.
The goose is getting fat.
Do you have the Muppets Christmas album too? I love that one.
We just watched the Muppet Christmas Carol movie.
Oh, did you?
My son picked it out and said, "Dad, because I know it's one of your favorites." And full disclosure, it actually is.
Do you like the crabby guys that sit in the theater? I'm wondering who you like.
You know, I actually sing along to it. It must have struck at the right time of my childhood because I still sing along to that movie as we're watching it in the basement.
Okay. Well, let's dive in.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys, it is Christmas. You are going to have us in Isaiah. You're going to have us in Isaiah for, I think, 4 weeks. Is that correct? And we're going to be in about one verse. So,
one verse.
So
pretty much.
We're going to milk that thing.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to dig really deep. But before we start, I just would love to give an overview of what Isaiah is and what it covers, and then I'm going to let you guys geek out and sit back and have fun. So is that okay? That's what I think is going to happen. That's going to be the dance.
That's a prediction.
That's going to be the dance we're going to do. So Isaiah is found in the Old Testament. Yep. Isaiah is a prophet. We call him a major prophet, not because he was all that in a bag of chips, but because he was long-winded and there were a lot of words, and so it's major that way.
I don't know if I would summarize it that way, but
wow. Okay. So where Isaiah's looking down going, "Lord, did you hear what she said about me?"
I actually feel sorry for Isaiah because God says you're going to tell these people about my judgment, and your job is going to be futile because they're not going to change. Right. But you're also going to...
And he doesn't need you throwing him under the bus.
Okay.
He had a rough
Isaiah,
life.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
And he had a rough ending.
That is true. So, but he also gives us hope and joy. So that is what Isaiah does for us. And that's what we are going to do this Christmas, is give our people joy. So I know people always want to know, why this series? How did you guys get here?
Yeah.
So...
Well, this is from the Alleluia chorus, really, is where it came from for me. So the passage we're going to read is, can I read it this week?
Oh, yeah, I'd love that. I'd actually like you to sing it.
Isaiah 9, no, you don't. Isaiah 9:6 is, "For a child will be born for us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders. He will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace." And then verse 7 says, "The dominion will be vast, its prosperity will never end. He'll reign on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and sustain it with justice and righteousness from now on and forever. The zeal of Yahweh of armies will accomplish this." So we know this from the Alleluia chorus. I mean, it's right in there, and we sing these 4 titles. And when we say Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Eternal Father, and the Prince of Peace, particularly that Prince of Peace one, this is Christmas for us. This is what we think of. And we immediately think of Jesus. And so we got to talk about that because this is not written when Jesus is about to be born. It's written hundreds of years before.
This isn't what the angels said as Jesus was being born. I think sometimes our brains put that in that context, but there's something radically unique, beautiful, happy in the moment, and foretelling to that.
All right, so let's talk about a little bit of the background of Isaiah, because this will help us as we teach the series. We won't have to do so much of this in the sermons themselves, but let's talk a little bit about the background of what happened. So if we go back way before Isaiah, if we go back to King David, King Saul, not a great king. Yeah. King David, fantastic king. Mm-hmm. King Solomon, actually really good king for many, many years for his people. He's not a good guy at the end of his life. He walks away from the Lord, but a good king. Mm-hmm. And then his son comes to the throne and the kingdom splits.
In two, yep.
And so you have the nation of Israel, and they are their own country, and the nation of Judah. And Judah keeps Jerusalem. It's a divorce. They keep Jerusalem and the temple, and that's really powerful. And Israel keeps the name. Israel. And their first king in Israel is afraid. Even though God has said, I am doing this thing, he is afraid that if people will go to Jerusalem to worship Yahweh, that they'll just want to stay there. They'll see how great it is. This is right on the heels of Solomon. I mean, the temple's magnificent. Yeah. Everything is magnificent. It's a wealthy place.
If I go to Hawaii, I might not come back.
You might not come back. Okay. Don't go do, it's, I don't know. People say that whenever they find out that like you're teaching in another church or something, somebody asks you to come to a retreat, it's like, hey, you're not, don't stay there, right? Like, you're going to come back. So, you get it. This is part of our makeup, part of our nature. But he doesn't want that to happen. So he builds his own place for people to worship. And it's a fiasco. And Isaiah, it ends up being a snare to the people of Israel.
So Isaiah is a prophet in the nation of Israel then, correct?
Isaiah is prophesying for King, mostly about King Hezekiah.
Okay.
And Hezekiah is the king of Judah.
Oh, he is of Judah. Okay.
Yeah.
He prophesies about both nations. Okay. He's prophesying to both leaders that are corrupt.
Because Ahaz he prophesies too.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So he's speaking to both. He historically moves a little bit, but yes, this is
For all intent and purposes, we get thrown into the middle of a story for the first 5 chapters. And then in chapter 6, we learn who Isaiah is. Because Isaiah chapter 6 is where Isaiah goes into the temple and has this vision from the Lord. And the Lord says, you're going to speak for me. And that we meet him, but we've already learned a bunch of other stuff about him. Mm-hmm. So Isaiah is a tough book for a lot of people because it does he does speak in very prophetic language, and a lot of it is looking forward, a lot of it is looking back, and you never quite are sure what he's talking about, whether he's talking about now, later, what has already been.
Already not yet.
Right.
You just never know. Okay.
Yeah. So by the time of Isaiah, the nation of Israel has never one time had a good God-honoring king. Yeah. They don't have one. And they're so evil and so wicked. Think King Ahab. Ahab was the king of Israel. Yeah. Things are so bad that they basically get wiped out. Israel wants to overthrow Judah, and the king of Judah makes an alliance with this young upstart kingdom called Assyria, and Assyria marches in and protects Judah by God's grace from being overthrown by Israel. Israel is then so weakened that they get carried off to captivity by Assyria because they've conquered them. But then Assyria turns its attention to, hey, those guys we were protecting, we kind of like those guys. We like that land. We want that land. And so then they come and try to attack Judah. And so Isaiah tells that whole story of God saying, that's not going to happen right now. I'm going to protect you and it's going to be okay. But because of your sin, this is eventually going to happen. So that sort of places us in the middle of the story.
So if we get into Isaiah, then we can look back and kind of the chapters even, we're going to be in Isaiah 9, but the chapters before that are speaking of this thing that's happening, what's going to happen with Israel and Assyria, and what's going to happen. And one of the things I have appreciated sitting in it is the way it speaks to how hard this is for these people. Like you can start to place yourself in these moments and seeing the amount of hopelessness and fear. And, as you just talked about now, Assyria, this nation that just destroyed Israel.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you know much about Syria as a country, violent, torturing, it's not just they captured you and took some people away. It's just utter devastation.
Yeah.
And now they're marching on the doors of, they're going to be marching on the doors of Jerusalem here to come now take them, and kind of gives us context to where we're coming to in this text in Isaiah 9.
So let's talk about Isaiah chapter 9. Let's talk about that section. What's happening is, the dogs of war are at the door.
Yeah, right. Wow.
And God is giving a promise that this is going to be okay. This is going to be okay. It's not always going to be okay. You are going to be judged, but I'm going to rescue you right now. And so there's this whole back and forth, and you can read this in Kings, you can read this in Chronicles, and you read it in Isaiah. There's all of the maneuverings that are happening. But one of the things that happens is God asks King Hezekiah, who's a good man, is a good king. God will say, well, what sign should I give you that it's me speaking to you? And God frequently does this with different kings.
Which is so gracious of God.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a sign. I'm going to give you a sign. So one of the signs that he says, and this is a famous passage for us for Christmas, is this will be a sign to you. The virgin will be with child. She will conceive and give birth to a son. So here you go. And everybody reads that Jesus. But that's not exactly, that is part of what is being talked about here, but it's not what it means to Isaiah and his contemporaries.
So it's what we hear when we read it, but it's not what they heard when they heard it. So what did they hear, Steve?
What they heard was that God was going to give them a promise that he would rescue them, and that one day, so there's that fulfillment, and that comes to fruition. But then he also says, and the child that will be born will sit on David's throne forever, will reign, and there will be an eternal kingdom. So there's an initial fulfillment of that, probably through Isaiah and his wife having a child. That's one theory. Another theory would be Hezekiah's son. So there's different theories of who that child was in their day. But later on, when Jesus is born, the angels link this and say, remember all the way back when Isaiah was saying that a child was going to be promised and there was going to be deliverance? Well, this is the fulfillment, the ultimate fulfillment of that. That was a promise to them, but in a similar way, this is being fulfilled today. And the completion of that is now about to happen.
Well, and it's important to note that because though we see chapter 7, the Emmanuel, God with us, being referenced in the New Testament that way, we don't see Isaiah 9 referenced in the New Testament in that way.
Right.
So we see this quoted and it's brought back. And so you're like, well, then how do we know that this is connected? And it's because this is a part of a big story arc that's happening prophetically.
Yes.
They're not separate pieces. They're all part of this thing. And so when we realize that, he's connecting us back to the beginning of this with King Ahaz, and the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son. Now Isaiah's building on that and saying, and then here's what is going to happen. This is what's going to occur as a result of what is given and God's presence coming in and his grace through the King Hezekiah. This is now what will happen in that, and then ultimately come back to, we connect both to Jesus again because of that.
So last week in the message, one of the things that I talked about was showing us how the Passover connects to what Jesus is going to do by being the ultimate sacrificial lamb, shedding his blood. There's going to be, death and sin and all of its effects are going to pass over us. As a result, one day we will march into our own promised land that, we are to, anytime we eat of communion together, one of the things we have to remember is this world is not our home. And so we are traveling to a new place that God is creating for us. So there's this imagery, God, of recreation that constantly, after the creation in Genesis and the fall, there's this recreation imagery that occurs throughout the Bible. And so here we go again. Here's another example of, yes, this thing is happening and it has meaning and significance to them. But we also have to look at the way God is continually bringing these things about. There's this a cycle to this. And so it not just fulfilled and then done, that there's a fulfillment here and then there's a further fulfillment later. And this is when we talk about the now and not yet. This is what we're talking about. So the Passover is not meant to be, well, it's just the Passover. No, Jesus very clearly, it's about him, and it becomes, fulfilled in him. Well, the virgin will be with child, wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, is obviously not talking about a human being. No one would be called, mighty God or eternal Father, who's just a human being.
Right.
So there's got to be something coming, and they were smart enough to know that God was speaking to them and telling them something, but there was something else coming too. This is hard to understand about the Bible. This is hard.
There's always a tension.
Yeah, it's hard about prophecy, and it also is what leads to people manipulating prophecy in the Bible and using prophecy to say things that it doesn't say, and generally enriching themselves to do that, taking something and twisting it and saying, well, this is what this is about.
One way we see that is in this verse where it talks about, and he will be named. Names there's a duality to that as well, is that the name, as it refers to Hezekiah, speaks to what God is going to do through him.
Right.
And then the name speaks to, it's not that Jesus is official. Jesus' name is Jesus. So we see that in the Christmas story, but it speaks to the not only what God's going to do through him, but that he ultimately is this. Whereas God demonstrated his power. Mighty God is just an example through the work we saw in the story of Hezekiah with the defeat of Assyria as an army. God demonstrates him being the mighty warrior and power for Israel. But then Jesus comes and ultimately defeats all of sin as the ultimate warrior, demonstrating who he is. And it's just a way of because we think of names as just saying who that person is, but biblically names have a greater significance of not just who they are, but association.
Yeah.
And there's an association with this
Almost like what they are.
Well, Hezekiah, the people of that day would never have thought that Hezekiah was a mighty God.
Right.
They would have seen it as, oh no, this is God doing these things through Hezekiah.
That's exactly right.
Giving the glory and the honor.
Yes.
And it was later on that the connection was made. It was like, oh my goodness, this is talking about Jesus.
Yes.
The light has dawned on those living in the land of darkness.
Yes.
You've enlarged the nation, increased its joy. The people have rejoiced before you. They rejoice at the harvest time. And as they rejoice when dividing spoils, you've shattered the oppressive yoke. I mean, all the things that Jesus is doing. So it's reading into that and saying, oh, wow. Isaiah was talking about his day and age, but the message that God was giving to him was so much fuller than we thought.
We see that in verse 7.
Yes.
The dominion will never end.
Have no end.
It will be the final establishment of justice and righteousness from now until evermore. And that's what Jesus comes to begin that in the kingdom, in our new kingdom we're living now, but still not fully completed.
Can we talk a little bit about Hezekiah?
Sure.
So he was a king.
Yep.
And you said good king.
Yeah.
And king in the southern kingdom. Isn't he also the king that when the Babylonians came, he decided to show them all his stuff?
Yep.
And that's where he
That's his.
that was Achilles' heel.
Well, I think that the title over my Bible in that I think is Hezekiah's folly.
Yeah.
Like this is where his ego got the better of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the mistakes we make in the Bible, if we're not careful, is that we deify everybody.
That's good. Yes.
And we say, this person, but they were flawed, therefore they're bad. No, they were just flawed. They're flawed like you and I are flawed. King David was flawed. Solomon was flawed. These are flawed people, but they're submitted to the Lord. And so Hezekiah messes up. He would have been better off probably just dying from the illness that he had.
The Lord healed him from, right?
Yeah. He's healed and he's given more years to live, and he would have been better off had he died, and he doesn't. And so after that is when the Babylonians come and visit, and he basically just shows off all of the wealth, and the Babylonians go home, and it's like inviting a ring of thieves into your house.
Right.
Like the king
Here's
of the
the
thieves
code to
comes
our-
in, and
yeah.
here's the code to our safe. Here's where all the valuables are,
Okay.
and they just go back and they go, okay, well, what time are we knocking this guy off?
Yeah.
And because Hezekiah is a good man, and because he has honored Yahweh and wants to honor the Lord and has a soft heart, when judgment is passed on him, which is now the Babylonians are going to come and take all the things that you showed them. Yeah. The grace of God was, but it's not going to happen when you're alive. And we can see kind of where Hezekiah, where his heart has gone, because he goes, oh, okay, that's good. That's a good thing, as long as it happens to my kids and not to me.
Which is crazy, because we would do anything to protect our kids from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a pride that has entered his heart.
You almost see the fruit of that as a father, because his kids directly become the ones that go opposite. They rebel against God. They bring idol worship. They defy God and who they are.
So ultimately, it's not just Hezekiah. God is long suffering.
Yeah.
And so when Babylon finally marches in, it's not like, well, Hezekiah did this to us. No, he didn't. He staved it off for as long as possible through his righteousness. And it really is the final straw of his kids and what they have done.
We don't often get to we spend actually a lot of time in the Old Testament, which is kind of unique. We don't often get to do that, but to come into the prophets is also sweet, to be reminded of, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the message itself, but how it's a demonstration of God's long-term plan, how God is always working in darkness. God is always working when it seems like nothing's happening that makes sense to us. That is in fact the first way that we'd see Jesus described, which we'll talk about more actually in the sermon.
Yeah.
And I love that you're going to slow us down, that we really are going to be in that one verse. I think this season we just get so busy with the hustle and bustle. So I love that you're going to orientate us to the truth and the hope and the joy that we do have this season. So.
Well, our prayer is for the series that coming out of it, we would know and have experienced Jesus as all of these things. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace.
Yeah.
And that we truly would know what that means.
I look forward to it. Thank you for joining us this week. Bye-bye.